האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Yitro. We are doing Drush, our Os Tes Zion. So that is section 16. And the Zera Shimshon is going to talk about a fascinating topic, which is based on a Gemara, as we'll see in Masechta Shabbos, that says there are 5 different names, and actually it'll turn out to be 6 different names for Har Sinai and the area, the wilderness area, the midbar around Har Sinai. And so if you thought the only name was Har Sinai, you were mistaken. And we're going to learn about all the other names of the mountain and the area around it. Let us begin. Again, this is Os Tes Zion in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Yisro. Shabbos, the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, Perek Tes, in the 9th Perek. Omar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Chanina, said, Chamisha Shemos Yeshlo Lahar Sinai. There are 5 names for the mountain that we call Har Sinai. And as you'll see in just a moment, we're not just referring to the mountain, we're referring to the whole wilderness area, the midbar around the mountain. So the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina starts off. Midbar Tzin, the first name is the wilderness of Tzin, Shenitztavu Yisrael Alav, which hints to the fact that the Jewish people were commanded, Nitztavu, to do the mitzvos on Har Sinai. So that area received the name Midbar Tzin. That's the first name. Midbar Kadesh, it also is given the name or referred to with the name the wilderness of Kadesh, which of course we see the connection to the word Kadosh, holy. Sheniskadshu Yisrael Olav, and this is because the Jewish people were sanctified on Har Sinai. So we have a second name. We have Midbar Tzin, and now we have Midbar Kadesh. Now we have a third name, Midbar Kedemos. It is the wilderness of Kedemos, and the word Kedemos means something that came before. Kodem means before, so it can refer to something older, something ancient, maybe even something primordial that came before the world. Shenitno Keduma Alav, because the Torah, which is referred to as Keduma, as preceding the creation of the world, was given on this mountain. So that's the reason for the third name, Midbar Kedemos. Now we have a fourth name, Midbar Paran, the wilderness of Paran. Sheparu v'ravu Yisrael aleha, because the Jewish people were fruitful and multiplied at Har Sinai. And we'll pause just to explain what that means. For a period of time leading up to the giving of the Torah, Hashem told Moshe to tell the Jewish people that men and women had to separate. Married couples couldn't be together in order to prepare themselves for the experience of Hashem coming and the revelation at Har Sinai. And so they separated from themselves. After the Torah was given, Moshe specifically says that they should return to their tents, which is a euphemism or a hint to the people that now they can go back together and resume marital life. And Chazal tell us that they were blessed with a special blessing to be able to give birth and have children at that time. So Midbar Paran connects to this idea of Paru v'ravu. They were fruitful and multiplied after the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai. Good. So those are I'm sorry, one more, and then we have one more reason. Midbar Sinai, and of course the wilderness is also called Midbar Sinai, which is the 5th name. Sheyarda Sina le'umos ha'olam alav, because a hatred for the nations of the world started at Har Sinai, meaning Hashem felt a hatred for the nations of the world because, according to Chazal, he offered them the Torah and they rejected the opportunity, and only Klal Yisrael accepted it. And we'll see that acceptance itself is questionable later. But in any case, the Klal Yisrael accepted, at least on some level, they accepted the Torah at Har Sinai. we received the Torah there, and therefore at that point and at that time began a hatred, a sinah connected to the word Sinai, began for the Umos HaOlam who rejected the Torah. Umashmo, so the Gemara asked, and what was its original name? Meaning, we understand that Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Hanina just brought 5 names, but those names could not have been original names because they all are based on events that took place after the mountain had existed, presumably since the beginning of creation, since the Brias HaOlam. So what's the original name of this mountain, the Gemara asks? Chorev Shmo, and the Gemara answers, Chorev is its original name. So Chorev's the original name, and then we talked about 5 additional names. Then the Gemara continues, Upliga de Rebbe Abahu. This statement, this last statement about the original name being Chorev, argues with a statement made by Rebbe Abahu. The Amar Rebbe Abahu, because Rebbe Abahu said, Har Sinai Shmo. Rebbe Abahu insisted that the original name was Har Sinai and not Har Chorev. So then Rabbi Abahu continues, Veloma Nikra Har Chorev, and why was this mountain originally called Har Sinai? Why was it given the name Har Chorev? Sheyarda Chorba le'umos ha'olam alav, because destruction came down to the nations of the world on this mountain. Ad kan Lashono, until here's a quote from the Gemara and Shabbos, and the Zera Shimshon will discuss this idea of chorva, of ruin and destruction coming down for the Umos HaOlam on Har Sinai. But let's pause for a moment, because this Gemara, this section from the Gemara in Masechah Shabbos that the Zera Shimshon quoted for us is very significant, of course, and very interesting. And so basically we have been taught that in the view of Chazal, in the view of our sages, brought down by Rabbi Yossi, by Rabbi Hanina, the mountain where the Torah was given had an original name, and that name was either Har Sinai or Har Chorev. And in addition to that, it had 4 other names besides Har Sinai and Har Chorev, and reasons for those names were given to us in the Gemara. So now the Zera Shimshon is going to comment. Next paragraph. Yesh ledaktek. We need to inquire. Lama itztarichu kol chamisha shemos elu. Why was there a need for all 5 of these names, these different names? Meaning, if we accept that there was some original name, okay, we don't have to ask the reason for the original name necessarily. Every mountain in the world has a name. Things have names for original names, but all of the additional names, what was the reason for the additional names? These additional 5 names. Venira, and it would appear, Shebishvil arba ta'amim amru biyalku. It would appear that these additional names that are brought in the Gemara and Shabbos are connected to the 4 reasons that were said in a medrash in the Yalkut Shimoni, Shenitna haTorah b'midbar, that the Torah was given in a wilderness. Now let's pause for a moment. We often take for granted that the Torah was given in Har Sinai in the middle of the wilderness. It's a story that we learn when we're little children, and rarely does anyone ever ask the question, why? Why did Hashem do such a strange thing as give the Torah to Bnei Yisrael in the middle of the wilderness? Hashem, of course, could have given the Torah to the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, or right when they were leaving Mitzrayim. Hashem could have said, let's not wait. This is it. You've been freed from slavery. I want to give you the Torah. But Hashem waited and delayed until they had left Mitzrayim, experienced Kriyas Yamsuf, and then were in the middle of the Midbar. Or we might have expected that Hashem would take them out of Mitzrayim, bring them all the way to Eretz Canaan, and give them the Torah in Eretz Canaan. In a way, what could be more beautiful, special, and holy than that? To give Bnei Yisrael the Torah in Eretz Yisrael, in the land that would ultimately become Eretz Yisrael. But Hashem did not do that either. So Hashem said, I'm not going to give it in Mitzrayim or right outside of Mitzrayim. I'm not going to wait until we get to Eretz Canaan. I'm going to give Bnei Yisrael the Torah in the middle of the midbar, in the middle of the wilderness. So the Yalkut asks, why? Why is that? And it gives 4 different reasons, and the Zera Shimshon is going to connect those reasons to the names given to Har Sinai and the area around it by the Gemara and Masechta Shabbos. So let's take a look at that. Aleph, reason number 1 that the Torah was given in a midbar, in a wilderness. Lilam decha, to teach you, she'im ein oda mafkir atzmo kamidbar, if a person is not willing to open himself up or make himself ownerless, like a wilderness, eino zocher ledivrei Torah. He will not merit to understand to understand the words of Torah correctly. So a person has to be willing to abandon himself, so to speak, and just completely devote himself to understanding the Torah in order to merit doing so. Beis, reason number 2. Uma hamidbar hazeh ein lo sof, just like a wilderness appears to have no end, it goes on endlessly. Kach divrei Torah ein lahem sof. So too the words of Torah have no end. There will always be Torah to study, more Torah to study and learn, no matter how many generations the Jewish people are around to study the Torah. It will continue, and it'll never run out. Shene'amar, as a pasuk in Eov says, Aruka me'eretz midah. Its length is more than the earth. Its measurement, its midah, is longer and lengthier than the entire earth. That's a reference to the infinite quantity of Torah. Gimel, reason number 3 that the Torah was given in a midbar, in a wilderness area. Ukeshem she'ein lo sof, just like the Torah itself has no end. Kach ein sof lematan sechara. So too, there is no end to the giving of reward for those who devote themselves to the study and observance of Torah. Shene'amar, as a pasuk in Tehillim says, Ma rav tuvcha, how abundant is your goodness, how abundant is the reward that people receive for keeping the Torah. Now Dalet, now reason number 4. Ve'od amru sham b'samuch, and they also say in the Gemara, in the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni over there in the same place close by, Vayachanu bamidbar. They quote from a pasuk that says the Jewish people camped in a midbar, in the wilderness. She'ilu nitna Torah be'eretz Yisrael. This teaches us that if the Jewish people had been given the Torah only after they came into Eretz Yisrael, they would then have said to any non-Jews, to the non-Jewish people of the world, Ein lachem chelek ba. You have no portion in the Torah. The Torah it belongs singularly and exclusively to Bnei Yisrael and was given to us in our land, in Har Sinai, and you, nations of the world, you have no portion in it whatsoever. Elanitna bamidbar, but in order to prevent that, Hashem gave it to us in a wilderness, demos parhesia, in a public area, b'makom hefker, and in an ownerless place. The whole idea of a wilderness is that there's no private property there. No one owns the land in the middle of the desert or in the middle of a wilderness. And the message is called harotze lekabel yavo v'yekabel. The message is anyone from any human being in the world who wants to come and accept the Torah, which means, of course, to convert, to be fully obligated in the mitzvahs of the Torah. A person has to convert and become part of Klal Yisrael. So, but kol harotze lekabel, anyone who wants to accept the Torah fully and completely, not just the Sheva mitzvos of Bnei Noach, can do so and is welcome to do so, and will not be, should not be rejected by the Jewish people. Okay, so let's pause again, because now we have 2 different teachings from Chazal. We have the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos that brought down the 5 different names for Har Sinai, and we really said it's 6 names because you have an original name and then 5 additional names. But in any case, we were dealing with 5 or 6 names, depending on how you slice it. And now the Zera Shimshon brought us 4 reasons in the Yalkut Shimoni as to why Hashem chose to give the Torah in the middle of the wilderness. And of course, now he's going to put those two things together. Next paragraph. And in order to hint to the four reasons given in the Yalkut that we just read about, the four reasons why the Hashem chose to give the Torah specifically in the wilderness, Nitan Lamidbar Hazeh Dalet Shemos. In order to hint to the four reasons, Hashem gave the area where the Torah was given, the wilderness area where the Torah was given, four different names, because the Torah was given there for four different reasons. So there are four different names to capture that idea. And now the Zera Shimshon is going to go down the list of names one by one and show how they connect to the reasons in the Yalkut Shimoni. Midbar Tzin, the first name was the wilderness of Tzin. And we said that name reflected Shenitztavu Yisrael Alav, that the Jewish people were commanded to do the mitzvos at Har Sinai. Nitztavu Alav, they were commanded there. Lasos Atzmam Kamidbar. And the first step in receiving the mitzvos in the Torah was that they were commanded to make themselves like a wilderness, Bishvil Lizkos La Torah, in order to be ready to merit the receiving of the Torah. So yes, ultimately the Bnei Yisrael were given all of the mitzvahs of the Torah. However, before that, they had to perform a mitzvah of making themselves like a midbar, as we said, abandoning themselves up and opening themselves up like an ownerless area to say, I don't have any other property. I don't have any other goals. I don't have anything other else. I'm opening myself up completely to receive the Torah. I'm completely committing myself to the Torah. So that's the first step and the first connection between the one of the names in the Gemara Shabbos of Midbar Tzin and one of the reasons in the Yalkut. Now we go to name number two, Midbar Kodesh. We said the second name was the wilderness of Kodesh, and Niskadshu Yisrael Alav, and that reflected the fact that Bnei Yisrael were sanctified at Har Sinai. Shelo yiyu omrim leumos ha'olam. This name reflects the fact that we should not say to the nations of the world, Ein lahem chelek ba, you have no portion, you cannot possibly ever have a portion in the Torah. Kamash Malon, because it comes to teach us, Sheniskadshu alav b'makom hefker, that when Hashem sanctified us with the Torah, it wasn't an ownerless place. We could not claim that we owned the land where Har Sinai was located. We didn't own the land where the mountain was. We didn't possess the land of the midbar, of the wilderness. No one possessed it. And so the whole idea was we are being sanctified through through receiving the Torah and the giving of the Torah. So too other people can become sanctified by receiving the Torah if they go through the steps that they need to go through to be able to do that. Continuing with the third name, Midbar Kademos, the wilderness of the ancient or primordial Torah, Shenitna Kaduma Alav, because the ancient Torah that preceded the creation of the world was given there. Lirmos, to hint, Kishem Shaham Midbar Ein Lo Sof, just like a wilderness has no end, it seems to go on forever. Kachat Torah Ein Lo Sof, so too the Torah has no end. It's constantly expanding, and we can study it our entire lifetimes and never come close to finishing it. Kishem Shehi Kaduma, just like we know that it existed before the world. So it is infinite. The Torah is not bound by the rules, the normal materialistic rules of this world. Midbar Paran, and why was it called the wilderness of Paran? Sheparu v'ravu aleha Yisrael, because the Jewish people, as we said before, were fruitful and multiplied after the Torah was given. They returned to regular marital life, and they were blessed with children at that time after the Torah was given. Lirmos, this is a hint, shekeshem she'ein law, just like it has no end, top of the next column, ein sof lematan sechara. So too, there is no end to the giving of reward for the study and the performance of the mitzvahs of the Torah. V'zehu sheparu v'ravu aleha. And this is what is meant by the fact that it says they were fruitful and multiplied. Shelefi rov hamasim tovrim shel habonim. It's according to the abundance of good deeds that the children do. Kain misrabet tomid sechar ha'avos. Then, according to the good deeds of the children after their parents leave this world, that multiplies reward forever for the parents, Began Eden, in the next world. The Kaimalon, as we hold based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Bara Mizake Abba. A son can bring merit to a father even after the parent leaves this world. The Od Ksiv, and we also see this in a pasuk in Mishlei, Gil Yagil Avi Tzadik. The parent of a righteous person, of a tzaddik, will rejoice and rejoice. Gil Yagil will certainly rejoice, or will have a double rejoicing. And the Medrash comments, Gila Achar Gila. This means not just one rejoicing, but rejoicing over and over again. Kidi Isa b'Medrash, as it states in the Medrash Rabbah, every single time a child does a mitzvah in this world, there is a merit and a reason for rejoicing by the parents, even after they have left this world. Ve'ayin la'el b'Parshas Toldos, and you can look previously on this in the Zera Shimshon says in his piece Os Beis in Parshas Toldos ba'orech al zeh at length about this topic. So let's pause here because the Zera Shimshon has done what he promised to do, and then he still was going to go on. But let's recap here. We have our 5 names in the Gemara Masechta Shabbos for Har Sinai and the wilderness area surrounding it. We had our 4 reasons in the Yalkut as to why Hashem chose to give the Torah in such a strange place as in the middle of a wilderness. So the Zera Shimshon said, I'm going to connect 4 of the names, the first 4 names of Har Sinai and the area around it, to the 4 reasons given in the Yalkut. And he has just done that. Of course, he still has to deal with the fact that there's a number problem between the 5 or possibly 6 names that the Gemara in Shabbos talks about and the only 4 reasons given in the Yalkut. And he's going to deal with that. But first, he's going to digress for a moment and deal with a problematic Rashi in the next paragraph. Ve'evsher, and it's possible, she'Rashi ramaz al zeh b'lishono hatamua. It's possible that Rashi was hinting to this whole issue that we just talked about, this whole point that we just made, when he used a very strange language on the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos. And Rashi said, Sheparu v'ravu, when it said that the Bnei Yisrael were fruitful and multiplied at Har Sinai, Rashi said, Shekol echad nisabra ishto v'yolda zachar. Every one of the women that were there at the time became pregnant and gave birth. V'lo yadana hecha remiza. And Rashi says, I don't know where that is hinted to. Rashi said, where does that idea come from that everyone merited to give birth at that time? Ad kan lashono, until here's a quote from the Rashi. Umnam, however, b'masha pirashnu, with what we just explained, meaning this connection between the names and the names in the Gemara and the reason in the Yalkut, ha'arba shemos keneged ha'arba ta'amim. The 4 names correspond to the 4 reasons, hanizkar la'el, which were mentioned previously. Im kain tam haravi, if so, the 4th reason, the ein sof lamatan sechara, there's no end to the giving of reward for the study of Torah, hu la'asid lavo. That refers not to a reward in this world, but rather to a reward in olam haba, and to the next world, as we talked about the deeds of the children bringing merit to the parents who in the next world. Aval shekol echad tisaber ishto schar prati. But the idea that maybe it refers to children, to parents meriting having children at Har Sinai after the Torah was given, and receiving sachar prati, this individual reward for each person, ze lo yadana hecha remiza. That might be what Rashi meant when he said, I do not know the source for this. So the Zera Shimshon is positing that perhaps Rashi certainly understood the idea of people, the Torah being able to bring reward to parents in the next world based on the actions of their children in this world, but perhaps Rashi wasn't sure of the source for the idea that people actually were blessed with giving birth to children right after the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. So he dealt with that, and now the Zera Shimshon is going to return to his main topic about the 5 or 6 names and the 4 reasons in the Yalkut. V'af al pisha amar chamisha shemos yeshlo, and even though the Gemara said there are 5 names, v'yesh gam kein Sinai, and there's also the name of Sinai itself, and the Yalkut only had 4 reasons. So how do 4 reasons covered 5 names? Midbar Sinai itzterich legufe. The name Midbar Sinai is needed for itself, meaning according to the opinion that that was the original name of Har Sinai, we don't need any extra reasons to explain it. That was the original name, as we said before, that if something is the original name, it's not the drasha. We don't have to make a drasha about it. We're not expected to learn some deep symbolic meaning if that was the original name. So if Har Sinai was the original name, and then that whole area around it was called Midbar Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai, and that doesn't need a special explanation. The Od Sinai Nikranami Har. And that's because Sinai was also the name of the mountain. The Itzterich Lamai de Amrinon al Pasuk. And we talk about that name. We need that name based on a different statement in Chazal on the Pasuk and Tehillim, Lama Teratztun Harim Gavnunim. Why do you dance around or prance around, you tall, majestic mountains, and v'chule, etc. The Zera Shimshon doesn't continue with the quote, but that's the famous story that we teach the children about all the tall mountains wanting the Torah to be given on top of them, and Hashem saying, no, I'm not going to give the Torah on top of you, Harim Gavnunim, you tall mountains. I want to give the Torah on Har Sinai because it reflects humility, it reflects humbleness, and Har Sinai was a lower mountain and didn't prance around and claim the right for the Torah to be given there. Now he continues, Ve'od, and another reason why we don't have to worry about the other 2 names of Sinai and Chorev, the Yesh Plugta, because the Gemara brought down an argument in Sinai hu Shem ha'etzem, if Sinai was the original name of the mountain, Oim hu Chorev, or if Chorev was the name of the original, name of the mountain. We saw right in the Gemara that was quoted that there's a whole argument about that. V'lachein, and therefore, Eino dome la'acherim, the names Sinai and Chorev are not similar to the other 4 names, Devadai lekule alma ledrasha asu, because they certainly come for a drasha, meaning they are names that were given after the original name already existed, and therefore we are intended to learn something, to make a drasha and learn out something from those 4 additional names. But from the name Sinai and Chorev, which perhaps were original names, we don't have to try and interpret them in any particular way or connect them to the reasons given in the Yalkut Shimoni. The Od Yesh Lomar, and we can also say, Tehahu Merabonon, that in the Gemara and Shabbos that the Zera Shimshon quoted in the very beginning, it starts off with one of the rabbis, Dishol Rav Kahana, who asked Rav Kahana, Mi Shemialof, did you hear anything? My Har Sinai. What is the meaning of the name Har Sinai? One of the Rabbanim who is not named went to Rav Kahana and said, have you ever heard about the reason for the name Har Sinai? Omar Lei, and Rav Kahana said to him, etc. They had a little discussion about it. So the Zera Shimshon says, Lama ha-yeshoa lo dafkal Har Sinai lechude. Why did this Rav in the Gemara ask Rav Kahana specifically and only about the name Har Sinai? Why didn't he ask him about the other names? Why didn't he talk about Kadesh and Paran and the other names that are connected to the area? But he only asked him about Har Sinai. Elavadai, it must definitely be de Osam Hashar Hayayodea Tamam. The other names, he knew the reasons because he knew the statement of Chazal in the Yalkut Shimoni. He knew the reasons for the other names, but Aval Zesh and Nikra Har Lo Yoda Hatam. But the fact that Har Sinai was called Har Sinai as its original name, he didn't know the reason for that, and that's what he was asking Rav Kahana about. So the Zera Shimshon has brought several supporting ideas to the fact that really all we need to do is connect the 4 first names in the Gemara and Masechta Shabbos with the 4 reasons given in the Yalkut. We don't have to go further and find special reasons for the names Har Sinai and Midbar Sinai and Har Chorev and Midbar Chorev. That we don't have to do. V'hatosva sham, and Tosfos over there, meaning on the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, al hahi shekafa alehem es ahar kegigis, on the statement in the Gemara that Hashem held over or covered the people with the mountain like a barrel. Mikan modah rabba leoraisa, and the Gemara said from here, from this story about Hashem holding the mountain over their heads, there is a great announcement, so to speak, announcement of coercion against towards the Torah. Again, meaning that people should be allowed to say, Hashem, sorry if we don't live up to your expectations in keeping the Torah, but the whole Jewish people only accepted the Torah because they were coerced and forced to do so. That's what the Gemara seems to say over there. So Kosvu Tosfos writes, Sha'af al pi shekvar hikdimu naseh l'nishma, even though Bnei Yisrael already said Naseh l'nishma, they proceeded saying, we will do before we will hear, which means they accepted the Torah without any conditions. They said, Naseh, we're going to do it no matter what it is. So how can we talk about being coerced when they said Naseh v'nishma and they put Naseh first? Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Kishero ha'esh hagedola, when they saw the great fire at Har Sinai, Chazru bahem, they reneged and went back on their commitment of Naseh v'nishma because they were afraid. They said that the Torah is being given with fire and thunder and lightning, and out of fear they said we can't. We thought we could accept it, and we said we would accept it, but they reneged. V'nimtzeis kabalosam ba'ones. And so we find that their acceptance of the Torah was actually through coercion. So that's the whole. So the Tosfos verifies or supports the Gemara's statement that since it was done through coercion, even though the Jewish people said Naseh v'nishma, nonetheless there's a coercive element, and that should make it problematic. Aval mi medrash Tanchuma, but from the medrash Tanchuma shekoshav sham harif, that the Rif brings down in the Ein Yaakov, nireh shahatorah shebichsav kibluha beratzon. It would appear that they did accept the Torah bichsav willingly. The written Torah, Bnei Yisrael accepted willingly at Har Sinai. V'hutzra cha'ones l'Torah shebal peh. And force was only needed in order for them to accept the Torah shebal peh. So that is an answer to the question as to how, at least it's a partial answer, how can there be punishment for not accepting the Torah? No, they did accept the Torah. They accepted the Torah shebichsav totally willingly, but there was an element of coercion, at least originally, for the Torah shebal peh. The Gemara over there says later on in the time of the Purim story, the Bnei Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, I should say, accepted everything Torah shebal peh included. Ve'ot writes, and he gives another answer, shehatorah kibluha beratzon, that they accepted the entire Torah willingly, Torah shebichsav and Torah shebal peh. Avalo kiblu beratzon onesh habitul, but they did not accept willingly the idea of being punished for not doing the mitzvahs in the Torah. So it wasn't that coercion was needed to get, according to the second answer, it wasn't that coercion was necessary to get Bnei Yisrael to accept the Torah. They accepted the Torah, shebichsav and shebal peh. However, they weren't willing to accept the idea of being punished if people didn't violated the Torah or didn't fulfill all the mitzvahs in the Torah. V'ayin sham, the Zera Shimshon says, look over there for more of a discussion. And now what he's going to do is take that whole topic of accepting the Torah willingly or not accepting the Torah willingly or partially, and connect it to the argument that we saw that he brought down in the beginning about the names Sinai and Chorev, and show how those things fit together. It's going to get a little complicated. So hold on. Umeata, and from now, Manda Amar Sheyarda Sina, the opinion, the person in the Gemara who said that the reason for the name Sinai is because it reflected sinah, hatred, coming down to the Umos HaOlam. Svirale, he holds Sheyisrael Kiblu HaTorah Beratzon. He holds like the school of thought that we brought just previously at the end of the previous paragraph, that Bnei Yisrael did accept the Torah willingly. Umishum hachi hakadosh baruch hu sone ha'umo shelo ratzu lekabla. And therefore sinna came down from Hashem to the Umos Ha'olam because they didn't accept the Torah. They rejected it. So Hashem says, look, it's not impossible. You guys rejected it, but Bnei Yisrael just accepted it. And so sinna came down towards the Umos Ha'olam. V'gam ha'umos sonim es Yisrael. And this hatred that came down also reflected the fact that from that time that the Bnei Yisrael accepted the Torah, the Umos Olam began to feel sinna for Bnei Yisrael. Lefisha kiblu mashalo ratzu heim lekabel, because Bnei Yisrael accepted the Torah, which is not something that they were willing to accept, that they were willing to do. V'zeh goram lahem sinas hakadosh baruch hu, and this caused for them an increased hatred from Hashem. So you have kind of a circle. A cycle, I should say, of sinna, of hatred that starts at Har Sinai, because when Bnei Yisrael accepts the Torah willingly, again, according to that school of thought, Hashem is angry and feels hatred towards the Umos Ha'olam. Then the Umos Ha'olam hate and are jealous of Bnei Yisrael because they say, you went and accepted the Torah, kind of ruined it for everybody. We were all going to line up and refuse the Torah, but you had to go and accept it. And so they hated them. And then Hashem says, oh, in addition to not accepting the Torah, you're going to hate the people who did the right thing, the one group that did the right thing and accepted the Torah. You're going to hate them. Now I hate you even more. So a lot of sinna was involved at that time, and that's all connected to the name Sinai. Uman de Omer Sheyardu Chorba, the other opinion, the other person in the Gemara who says that the name that Chorba, that the name of the mountain originally was Sinai, and it was given an additional name of Chorev because Chorba, ruin came to the Umos Ha'olam, destruction came to the Umos Ha'olam. Svirale, he holds Shegam Yisrael lo kibluha beratzon. He holds, according to the school of thought, that the Bnei Yisrael did not accept the Torah willingly. Va'afal pichen kimuha. But even though they didn't accept it willingly, they observed it, they fulfilled it. V'zehu chorba shelahem, and that brought ruin to the Umos Ha'olam. Shenidunu lechorvel v'lishmama. They were judged to be destroyed and wiped out and desolated because Klal Yisrael taught an unbelievable lesson by their actions. They said, we didn't accept it willingly. Hashem coerced it on us, but we're still going to commit to doing the mitzvos. We're still going to keep the mitzvos. This meant that the Umos Ha'olam had absolutely no excuse, because even after they rejected it, the lesson of Klal Yisrael was, we also didn't accept it willingly, but we kept the mitzvahs. We continue to keep the mitzvahs in the Torah. You guys rejected it, and you don't keep the mitzvahs in the Torah, so there's no hope for you, so to speak. And so that's a reference to chorba, to utter destruction coming to the Umos Ha'olam. Now he's going to continue. V'od yesh lomar, and we can also say lefi masha kosu hamaforshim, according to what is written by some maforshim, she'im Yisrael kibluha beratzon, if Bnei Yisrael had accepted it willingly, as ein ha'umos yecholim od lahachzik ba, then there would have been no opportunity for the Umos Ha'olam to accept it, right? They rejected it. Bnei Yisrael accepted it. So the Umos Ha'olam are out. They missed their chance. They missed the bus. Shahare mitchila solku yedehem mimena, because in the beginning, they pulled their hands back. They withdrew their hands from the Torah when Hashem wanted to offer it to them. The Yisrael zachu ba, and Klal Yisrael merited, went ahead and accepted it and got it. Miyad, immediately, Haim Levadam, only them, only Klal Yisrael. They were the only nation who accepted the Torah willingly. Again, this is according to the school of thought that they did, the opinion that they did accept it willingly. Aval im Yisrael lo kibluha beratzon. But if they did not accept it, if we switch over to the other view that they didn't accept it willingly, but afterwards they kept it and fulfilled it, even though they hadn't originally accepted it except through coercion, that would mean that there was a window of opportunity open to the Umos even after Har Sinai, because they could have said, Bnei Yisrael is not that different from us. They had to be coerced into accepting it. They didn't accept the Torah willingly. Now we made a mistake in the beginning, and we want to come along and start keeping the Torah. They would have had that opportunity. The im kain man de omer sheyarda sina, and if so, according to the view of the one who says hatred came down, lefi shehem kiblua beratzon, that's because Bnei Yisrael accepted it willingly. And according to the opinion who said destruction came down lo chazru emes ba v'lekaima, because they didn't come back. The Umos Olam didn't come back and say, wait a minute, the Bnei Yisrael was coerced and didn't really want to accept it. Now give us a chance to keep it, just like they're keeping it. Kemosha asu Yisrael, just like Bnei Yisrael is doing it. So he's continuing, the Zera Shimshon is continuing to develop this idea that there is a connection between what the Gemara talked about in terms of a willing acceptance of the Torah versus a coerced acceptance of the Torah versus kind of in between possibilities. And he's saying that's all connected to the two schools of thought about whether sinah came towards the Umos Olam or chorba, destruction, came to the Umos Olam. Now he's got one final point he wants to make. Ve'odiik lomar chorba. And there's another reason why the Gemara was careful to use the specific word chorba, destruction. Mishum dekaimalon, because we hold, and he brings down the source in the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, we hold, and halacha, shahaben Noach eno mitzuve al kiddush Hashem, that a person who is a ben Noach, not a member of Klal Yisrael, a person who's a ben Noach, is not commanded to do Kiddush Hashem. That means if there's a situation amongst non-Jews in which someone says, if you don't violate one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, I'm going to kill you. The person, the ben Noach, the non-Jew, has no obligation to say, sorry, I'm not going to violate, you got to kill me. There's no obligation. That obligation does not exist to be Mekadesh Shem Shemayim in that way. Meaning that the Ben Noach should say, okay, normally I keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, but if you're threatening to kill me, I don't have to give up my life. V'dino hu sheya'avor ve'al yehareg. And the law is that the Ben Noach should violate that particular precept and not be killed, not allow himself to be killed. So very interesting law that the Rambam brings down about a Ben Noach who is being forced to violate one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. V'im lo rotza lavor, and if the Ben Noach takes a strong stand and he says, no, I am not going to violate this law of the Sheva Mitzvah, one of these Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, I'm not going to violate it, vinne hareg, and therefore he gets killed. Harezeh mischayev b'nafsho, he is obligated to, he's going to get punished for giving up his life. It's like someone who committed suicide. He wasn't supposed to give up his life in that situation, but he did give up his life. That was a bad thing, even though he might have had very admirable motivations, and he actually did the wrong thing and he gave up his life for no reason. Aval Yisrael, but by a member of Klal Yisrael, it's different. Lefisha kiblu Torah, because they accepted the Torah, mitzuvim al kiddush Hashem. They are commanded in certain situations to give up their lives rather than violate mitzvos in the Torah. Uva mesiras atzma al kiddush Hashem, and when a member of Klal Yisrael does give up his life or her life al kiddush Hashem, according to the laws of kiddush Hashem in those specific circumstances, this weakens the impurity in the world and the klipa, that's a Kabbalistic term that we've talked about before, the shell, which represents the kochos atuma, the impure powers in the world. It weakens it when a Jewish person gives up his or her life for Kiddush Hashem. The soser kol binyana, and it destroys all of the edifice and the building of impurity in this world. It's such a powerful force that it can destroy tuma in this world, kinoda, as is well known. Mishum hachi diek lomar, and that's why the Gemara was careful to say, sheyarda churba, that destruction came to the world, meaning once Klal Yisrael accepted the Torah at Har Sinai, however that took place, and committed themselves to the Torah, they brought a new concept into the world that didn't exist by the Bnei Noach, and that concept was giving one's life al Kiddush Hashem. And that brought destruction to the Umos HaOlam, because their power, the power of the Umos HaOlam, is based on the Kochos HaTuma, the impure power in the world. And the Kochos HaTuma take a terrible blow anytime a Jew gives his or her life to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. And God willing, we should never know from that, but understand how incredibly important that is. Yasher koach to everyone for joining, and we look forward to learning Zera Shimshon again next week.